I was a teacher for a long time. I was a teacher for 13 years, some in private, some in public education in the United States. Taught math the whole time, middle school math. So fifth through eighth grade, kind of taught all the different subjects that you could teach in those years, but really focused on Algebra 1. Came to EL in 2015 and have been working on Frax the whole time. They recruited me to help them make this fractions product. And when they told me about it, it was like, this is exactly the kind of thing that I wish that my eighth graders had access to. Yeah, I'd love to help you. But basically, like what I do is I take all of the experience that I have from being a classroom educator, right? And somebody who cares deeply about children and who cares deeply about mathematics and who knows the impact that quality mathematics instruction has on the trajectory of people, right? We think it's pretty well understood that math is in many ways a gatekeeper to good, high quality, high paying jobs in the future. It's a real challenge to help the majority of kids be able to learn math the way that we know they could learn math. There's all kinds of ideas about why that is, and it's a complex problem. It's a huge problem that covers a lot of different areas, and we're just trying to help solve a very small part of it, but a part that we really believe is critical.
My name is Dan Moriarty. I am a product designer at Explore Learning on the Frax team. I am working on Sector 3 currently. I've been helping to work on Frax for about 5 years. Prior to this, I worked on Math Gizmos, which is Explore Learning's original product, for a long time. And long ago, I was a high school math teacher for 4 years and a tutor. So that's my experience that I still, feel like it's a long time ago, but I'm definitely still drawing on it every day. I'm part of the content evolution team, is what we call it. It's a subset of the designer team. We're generally not designing the original games from scratch, but we come in after our first round of student testing. We watch all the student videos trying out these brand new games. We figure out what went well and what didn't. And then we work together on the changes that are needed, the clarifications, the making it longer, making it shorter, we basically get it from there to the point where it's ready for release, ready to go out on the website.
Part of my job is to look at what states require in various grade levels and then map that onto what we're going to do with Frax. And then we kind of, myself primarily, but with these other folks, kind of come up with essentially a curriculum map for Frax. And from there, kind of worked with other people, somebody called the product owner, who's the person responsible for the overall vision of the product, to kind of define what is Frax going to be, what's it going to look like, all the nuts and bolts of, like, is it going to be something that kids use every day? Is it going to be something that they can kind of access however they want? Are we going to have lessons? What are those lessons going to look like? What's the assessment going to look like? How are we going to know if we've successfully taught these kids or not? All those kind of questions, right, that go into designing something like Frax before anything's ever built. And I don't think there's much discussion left about the fact that number lines are the best way to teach this. It's just too hard to do in reality. Like in the real world of a classroom, that's too hard for a single teacher. But it's not too hard for when you have every student has a device, every student has an internet connection, then they can learn that. And once they've learned that and gotten that just-in-time feedback, then you can close those computers and have a really meaningful discussion, right? And do some really cool projects with the whole class, because everybody's on board now, right? Which is just not the way that the fractions instruction has tended to go in the past, because it's too hard. It's not the teacher's fault, right? It's the task itself is difficult. So my job is to kind of take that understanding of reality and say, okay, we need students to be able to measure fractions on a ruler, right? What kind of a task on the computer would be interesting for a kid to do? How do we make that happen on the screen? And then how do we make it fun? and then once that's done, I send these ideas. They're called wireframes. This is another word I learned after I came to EL. But basically, imagine there's really nothing more than PowerPoint slides of here's a number line. Here's how we think that the kids should be doing this. Here's what we would want the game to say if they make a mistake. And that goes to a gentleman named Joseph Brudloss, who actually makes it cool. He's the one responsible for the space ferrets and the awesome music and the beautiful pictures and all that stuff. And he's like, okay, so it's gonna be this thing called a gas cow in space, and you're gonna be rescuing it.
My name is Joseph Brudloss. I'm the art director here at Explore Learning, and I've been with the company since 2011, officially. Before 2011, I was brought in to work on Reflex in 2009. I'd say the favorite part of what I do is basically making products that I think kids will enjoy. And when the result can be enjoyed by people, I think it's great. I love to do something that I don't think other companies are doing. I think there's a lot of companies who are doing games. I don't think there's a lot of companies who are doing games where the story is important. Like I don't like the thing where like, hey, everybody, come and do this. I think it's important to have something that can engage the kids, and what's going to engage them is, characters that are flawed, characters that are interesting, things that aren't just typical. Maybe they're a little off the wall. But I try to appeal to everybody, basically. So there's a sort of a wide range of sort of themes. So some stuff's cutesy, some stuff's, more sciencey, some stuff is more actiony. And I think we have a pretty good mix of things.
And we have conversations, and my job is to be an advocate for the pedagogy, right? To say like, okay, that's a really cool idea, but we need them to learn this and it's going to distract them, right? Or like, oh wait, hey, what if we measured them and like put them in canisters? And there's this like really cool collaboration between the two of us. And then once he's done that, then I kind of write up some documentation that I send to developers. They turn it into a game, and then it goes to a different team. Like it comes back to me, and then I have to I have this thing that I can play, right? Which is amazing and magical. And it's like, wow, this was like a circle on a PowerPoint slide, and now it's a gas cow. This is like super cool, but it's static, it's dead, right? So it's like I come up with this like, okay, so I have this thing now. How are we going to teach with it? What are the questions that we're going to ask? In what order to help kids slowly learn how to do this? And then we test that with kids. And, we basically ask them to play it and tell us everything that's wrong with it. And say like, yes, that makes sense. We didn't think about that because I'm, however old I am, and like, and you're 10, and this makes sense to you or this doesn't make sense to you, and let me hear that and change the design to correspond to what makes sense to you, right? Once we come up with that progression and we test it, we're not done, because like there's a lot of ed tech out there that it's that, right? Like, so every kid logs in and every kid goes through these same things regardless of where they are in their learning. And our product doesn't do that. So we have an entire team of people whose job it is to take this shell of a game and make it smart, right? To make it react to the student's progress, both when they're doing well and when they're struggling, right? So I send them kind of a big picture, like this is what the game should do with students who are getting it, right? This is how you make it harder. This is how you make it more challenging. This is how you make it more interesting. So a student who's playing this and is like, yeah, I've been measuring stuff since I was like 2, is not bored. But at the same time, sitting right next to that student is going to be a student who's like, I've never used a ruler in my life. What do I do? And the same game, is able to respond to both of those realities, right? In education speak, we often talk about the zone of proximal development. Another way, like kind of a layman's term for that is like the growth zone, right? Like you want kids not in the danger zone where they feel completely in over their heads and they don't understand what's going on and they just check out. Like you don't want that. But you also don't want kids in their comfort zone where they're just like, oh, I got all this. This is easy. I do this. And then I go off and play you don't want that either. You want them in the growth zone that's between those, where they don't feel like they're in danger. They don't feel like they're over their heads, but they're constantly being challenged just a little bit more, go a little bit farther. And that's how kids learn. And so this team, this logic team, that's what they do. So that's the last step of something getting worked on before it goes out the door for Frax. So sector 3 is different than sectors 1 and 2 because it's kind of it's like the capstone, right? It's the thing that we've been building towards this whole time. When kids stop liking fractions, it's right about now. It's like, when all of a sudden you've gone from like, oh, I take a pizza and I cut it into 8 pieces and like 5 of them are 5/8, and now it's like, okay, we want you to add 5/8 and 1 1/3 and simplify your response. And kids are like, check please, I'm done. Like, this does not make sense anymore. It's not fun. It's not intuitive. I just want to go to English class. And right, like, we are fighting hard to have that not to be the case. And so Sector 3 is using all of that really important foundational conceptual understanding and skills that they learned in sectors 1 and 2, and now applying it to that hard stuff.
And they've designed this cool activity called Ancient Wisdoms, which you will see when Sector 3 comes out.
There's a Bobby who is actually a puffchilla. He's from a race of puffchillas. There's a whole planet where a lot of sort of puffchillas come from, and there's a couple different games that take place on that planet, including Ancient Wisdoms. So in Ancient Wisdoms, the idea is that you go down this planet and you dig for basically math rules, and then you go to these dig sites where there's like these sort of ancient sites, and you find these relics basically, but you also find gems.
It's this great environment for essentially mimicking paper and pencil work that we want students to be able to do, but it's still happening on the screen. It's where they are doing the adding and the subtracting, the multiplying and the dividing. It is a cool setting. It's a lot more engaging, I think, than regular old paper and pencil, but it looks a lot like paper and pencil. So we want to be sure that even when students are done with Frax and they go to their homework or a test or a standardized test, that even in that sort of sterile environment, they can answer these questions there too. Their learning will hopefully go beyond just being able to execute it in Frax.
The idea is, what we try to do is in each sector, we add new rooms basically and new features. So like in Sector 1, we had the student cabin and we had a trophy room. And then Sector 2, we added like an avatar builder and happy acres.
In addition, in Sectors 1 and 2, students have had their cabin that they can decorate and what we call happy acres, which is like a little fun simulated farmland in a sense. So for the tokens that they're earning in all the games, that's where they can buy things and decorate something and make it cool. We do have a new version of that coming for Sector 3. That'll be called Botland. And if the student testers are any guides, kids are really excited. They're just intrigued and they want to see, what is this new room going to be?
It's basically like a diorama with these little characters that you can move around. So they're all little robots from the game, and you can move around and do stuff with them and make your own little diorama.
Botland is going to be fun, I think. It's a little fictitious land where you can buy things specifically for the bots who are in the games, and I think students are going to like it a lot. Frax Sectors 1 and 2 are mostly conceptual understanding for students. It's the real, like, it's the foundation of everything. That's where we lay the groundwork for students understanding fractions as lengths, as numbers on the number line. We often use blocks to represent them. So we have 1/3 and then there's 2 blocks. This is 2/3. That's all conceptual, and that's sort of building the foundation, as I said. Sector 3 is really where it all comes together and where students start to learn the algorithms. They have to learn how to add and subtract fractions with like or unlike denominators. They have to learn to multiply. They have to learn to divide.
Research is pretty clear that the number line is the best way to teach fractions. But if you're not good at using a number line, it's going to be really hard to use that tool to then teach hard stuff, right? The stuff itself is hard enough. If the tool you're using to try and teach it is still difficult for students, you're sunk, and you're just going to be repeating the same struggles that you've had before. So Sectors 1 and 2 focused hard on, how do you use a number line? Let's get comfortable with the number line. We want you not just to be able to like put a fraction on it, but reason with it, right? We want you to estimate on it. We want you to use it to compare fractions, unlike fractions, which they've been doing all the way from Sector 1. Now, they've been comparing these unlike fractions since Sector 1. Now they're adding them. And so it's this like incremental step. It's a hard one for all kids, but it's not a leap anymore. It's a step because they've gone through sector 1. They did sector 2 where we introduced like, hey, fractions can be added just like normal numbers, right? And like we worked with adding like and subtracting like fractions, so fractions with the same denominators. We made it really intuitive on the number line again. Then we taught them how to make equivalent fractions, and they practiced that and they got good at it. And so all the sector 1 and 2 knowledge come together for the adding and subtracting on like fractions, which is probably the hardest part of all of that late elementary content, right? I think if you asked any elementary school teacher, where do the wheels really come off the bus for kids in fractions? It's going to be like, well, when I have to ask them to take 2 1/3 and subtract 1 5/8, and they look at me like, what? We are confident that when we get to that point with a Frax student, they're not going to have that what moment. They're going to be like, oh, I know where 2 1/3 is on the, like, I have a sense of that. And I have a sense of what 1 5 is. And I have a sense of what it means to subtract them. And I'm comfortable with the reality that you can do things with fractions that have different denominators because I've been comparing them for 2 years now, right? Or however long I've gone through these sectors. And I can estimate what the relative size of that answer is going to be before I ever do it because I've been doing that for 30 odd missions. And I'm good at it and it's fun and I feel confident in it. And so, yeah, okay, you're asking me to do this thing, but I have all the tools I need already. All I need help with is practice using those tools in the right environment. So I think that's the first thing that Sector 3 is going to do. We're not trying to teach them like these very like fragile, brittle rules of like when you add, find a common denominator, here's how you do it. When you multiply, cross cancel, here's how you do it, right? We don't do that. Instead, we put them in this environment that's called Ancient Wisdoms, which I'm super excited about. It's brand new for Sector 3. And we say like, here are the tools that you have that you already know, right? Make an equivalent fraction. Simplify a fraction. We just taught you that. That's basically making an equivalent fraction using division instead of multiplication. Find a common denominator. How do you do that? Well, we teach them how to like, all we're really teaching is how you find a least common multiple and then applying that to denominators. And then add like you've been doing for the last 30 missions. And it becomes super simple, right? Because we're not teaching them rules. We're saying, hey, you have tools in your tool belt, and there's not that many of them. There's like 4 of them. So you're already good at using these tools. Just learn which tool to use at which time, and this all starts making sense. And you've got a flexible understanding. You're able to do it really well. Like we can throw curveballs at you, and you'll be fine. And not only will you be fine, you'll be confident. You'll feel fine, right? Not only will you perform well, but your subjective experience of that is, I am good at math. And that's just as important moving on into middle school and high school, to have this self-concept of, I'm a mathematician. Of course I'm good at math. That makes sense. That's what we want every kid to come out of Frax saying. Math makes sense. Of course it makes sense. And we think that Sector 3 is going to tie it's going to take all these threads that we've been working on in sectors 1 and 2 and tie them into this bow and send kids on into middle school ready to be successful. I signed up to this because this is the product that I wanted my Algebra 1 8th graders to have because they were coming to me not knowing how to do fractions. For years, I was like, I can teach them algebra, but they don't know fractions, and I can't teach both, right? And as somebody who taught in that kind of pivot moment between middle school and high school, I was often talking to high school colleagues, right? High school mathematics teachers. And, there's a lot of ink that's been spilt about the role of Algebra 1 in kind of being a gatekeeper to high school math, right? Like kids who do well in Algebra 1 tend to go on to be successful in high school mathematics, and that unlocks at least the possibility for STEM careers and for these high-paying careers that, not everybody wants to be a mathematician or an engineer, but everybody should have the opportunity to be an engineer or a mathematician, right? And what a lot of folks have discovered is that like Algebra 1 is really that moment where like that door shuts for a lot of kids. What research is beginning to show, and pretty clearly, is that yes, it's Algebra 1 where the door shuts, but it's already starting to close in 5th grade, 4th grade really, with fractions. And the reason why the door slams shut at 8th grade is because kids aren't ready for the difficult, like algebra 1 is difficult for a number of reasons, in particular because it's this like really big step from like concrete mathematics to abstract mathematics, which then, high school math is all about. But that move towards abstraction actually starts in fractions. Being limited and having struggled through fractions, not just like how to do the fractions, but how to understand the fractions in elementary school is putting kids at a huge handicap by the time they get to 8th and 9th grade when they're taking algebra 1. And then, and then the trajectory is more or less set.
When I was a teacher, I taught high school math, and I taught some college-bound students in pre-calculus and some not college-bound students in consumer math. And I was a brand new teacher, fresh out of college. I could not believe how much those students struggled with fractions in both of those classes. Honestly, it was a hurdle we had to get past at the beginning of the year. And to those poor kids, and I get it now, that if you start the school year saying, okay, 11th graders, let's review some fractions first, they're like, this again? But I think any math teacher out there would tell you that if there's one piece that you could target, in one foundational piece in a student's math education that you wish you could target and fix, it would be fractions, because it would make all the rest of the math that comes more accessible. I didn't know how much of a struggle it was going to be even at the high school level, but I saw it myself. I think a lot of teachers would agree with me on that.
That's one of the things I love about working at EL is, unlike other companies, other products out there, EL doesn't try to be all things to all people, right? We're trying to find like, what are the places and the subjects in math and science, because that's what we know, that have the highest impact on the trajectory of kids. That's why we did reflex. That's why we did math back fluency. And that's why we're doing fractions and not geometry and not, there's a million other things in the elementary school curriculum that we could be looking at, perimeter and area and all, 2-digit addition and subtraction, all that stuff. We're not doing that because those things are important, but what's critical is understanding fractions.
Student testing is something that we've used extensively throughout the development of Frax. Every time a new game comes out, a new mission, new content, we want to see how it plays with real kids. And it's those we record the sessions so we can see kids' face, we can see what they're doing on the screen. And those videos are just gold to us, because that's the first time we're seeing our content with kids that are in the actual age group that is the target audience.
We have these wonderful people from our professional learning department who proctor one-on-one testing with these kids. So they sit in front of like essentially a prototype, and we tell them, because they are like, you're helping us build this thing. Like, you're the first kid ever to see this, right? Like, this is going to go out the door to millions of kids. You're the first one, and tell us everything you think is wrong, right? Like, what don't you understand? What doesn't make sense? They have a conversation, they play through the content, and the proctor's there if they have questions, if they get stuck, or if they're clearly thinking about something, but as a lot of kids don't like to externalize their thinking. So the proctor will say like, hey, tell me what you're thinking about. What's going on inside your head? Like, what does this make you think? And then they take a recording of that, and people like me who are sitting in my office in my house and don't have access to like going and working with tens of kids can watch those videos and scour them, like pour over them. And I'm like, oh, so that's what you thought you had to do, right? Or like, oh, I thought you were going to do that, but you interpreted it totally differently. And then we change the product before it ever goes out the door to correspond to what these actual students showed us the actual kids think.
In content evolution, we get data back after content has been out for a while, and we take a look at it, and it helps us see how the activities are really doing in the wild, and whether there are questions that everyone is getting right or that students seem to be really struggling with, activities that take too long. So it's a way to see, like in reality, how students are doing with it. So there are often waves of changes that come 6 months later, or a year later, 2 years later, to try to clean up what we have out there. And it's sort of fun and interesting to see what real live students are doing with the content, and then try to find targeted places where we can clean things up a little bit and make sure that nothing is running too terribly long. The data analysis portion is something we've already done with sectors 1 and 2 because they have been out there for a while. Once sector 3 has been out for, let's say, 6 months or a year, then that's our first chance really to get a look at the data at that point. So we will perhaps next summer, next fall, we'll get some data back from the logic team and take a look at how long the activities are taking, where any struggle might be. And at that point, we'll be looking at the content to see if we can really polish it up and make it function even better than it was originally.
We're starting to see in the data that we're getting back from school districts that we work with who are using Frax, that like just fractions, just getting better at fractions is changing the trajectory of kids who, like in 4th and 5th grade, who start multiple grade years behind the curve. They're passing at rates that like kids that don't use Frax aren't passing because it's fractions that makes the difference.
It was really gratifying when Frax first went out, how much like feedback we got, how much people liked the story. And they were really excited about the characters and everything. I'm glad that it resonates with people.
So I was actually able to be on a video call with a couple of our students to see them trying these games for really the very first time. And that's always pretty fun, even if it's a limited pool of students. But to see a student who is actually in that age group, like part of the intended audience, we've been working on something for months, and then here's a real live kid that we put on it, and how's it gonna go? It's fun to interact with kids like that, and just fun to see what they do with this brand new content right off the bat. You're sort of there for the unveiling in a sense. We take what we learn from that and learn where our pain points are and clean it up a little bit. So what eventually the public sees will not exactly be that, but that's our first time, the first draft of Frax essentially gets to see real live kids. One of the things that I did after the student testing was I took all of the text in that game and just laid it out on a big document and tried to make every piece of it just as clear, as brief, as concise as possible. We wanted to do the job, but we needed to be as short as possible. And so that's something where I felt like my teaching and tutoring experience was coming out, and just an ability to write and communicate clearly and concisely.
So obviously the meat of Frax are the games that have the instructions and the instructive meat inside of it. So it's like, how we teach the kids math, how we, kind of a through line of how we go from, blocks to fractions to mixed fractions to multiplying together and all that stuff. But that's great. You could just put those games together with no context and it would still teach the kids. But for engagement purposes, what we do is we have cutscenes, which are basically little animated story bits to kind of introduce and engage the student. So in order to make it interactive, what we do is basically kind of set up like TV rules, right? So you have a lot of angle changes. So you have a character talking and you'll flip to the reverse angle. You have the back of the head of the other character and talk to each other. They're lip synced and everything. Well, I always like doing the cutscenes because there's a lot of leeway for creativity there. My philosophy for doing courseware and stuff for children is I don't like to talk down to them. What I like to do is kind of push the envelope a little bit to make the kids interesting.
I think my favorite part is that my youngest son was in 5th grade this past year. And so he was one of those playtesters, and watching him have those aha moments and like be joking around with me as he's doing this really difficult fractions content that my 8th graders when I was a teacher couldn't do. And he's like basically like doing it like this and talking with me and saying jokes. And I was like, wow. And so seeing that for my own family and then thinking about what I longed to have for my students, and knowing that my son is about to become the same age as those students, and how much better prepared he's going to be. He wants to be a mechanical engineer. He thinks of himself as a mathematician. Yes, yes, I want that for every single kid who plays Frax. They might not want to become a mechanical engineer. Great. My oldest doesn't. He wants to be an author. But he at least sees himself as able to do that. And we want that for every single kid that plays Frax. So, and I think there's a good chance that that's going to happen.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I was terrible at it. I was really bad at math. In second grade, I was so disinterested in it. What I would do is I'd take my pencil, I would drop it on the ground and make it go under the little feet of my desk. It's like, oh no, I can't get my pencil. I guess I can't do the work. But I think it means a lot to kids because math is a dry subject. And I don't think schools do a really good job a lot of the times telling kids what math is for. There's just learn this, you know? I think there's a lot to be said about, engagement. And that's why I think gamifying math is a great idea.
So if it's a teacher who's been doing the same thing for 30 years and is hesitant to try something new, I'd ask, like, how do fractions feel for you? Do you enjoy teaching fractions? And are you satisfied with the outcomes of your students? And if you're not, would you be willing to try something new, but that doesn't demand a lot on your time, right? Like Frax does not require a bunch of prep time. Like you can literally have your students play it. And then there's extra material that you can use in the context of your classroom that we've already made if you'd like to use that too. So it can be as little or as much investment as you want, but we know from the data that we've got that it helps kids. And so, would you be willing to consider trying something new if it could change not just the outcomes for your students, but your own experience of teaching fractions, right?
Frax is definitely a non-traditional version of fractions instruction, but I think if you give it a chance, you'll see it's really good. It is, I don't think there's anything out there like it. And it is the best blend I have seen of something that is engaging, that really brings the students in and, to a topic that is often quite dry, and really understands the math and the pain points and the key foundational blocks of really understanding what a fraction is and being able to go from the basics up through everything you have to learn about fractions. And as any math teacher would know, fractions continue to come up. I mean, it never stops. It comes up in algebra, it comes up in trigonometry, it will come up in college math if students go that far with it. And if students have a weak point in fractions, it's going to hold them back at all of these upper classes. So we really hope we're providing a better foundational understanding of these fractions just as numbers that live on the number line and as lengths that you can picture as blocks that will free them up to understand and grow into all these future math classes as they get older.
Anybody who's been in a classroom knows that, like, you don't teach physics teachers, you teach people. And those people, some of them haven't had breakfast. Some of them have struggled through math their entire career and are actually at a second grade level. And some of them are coming from families where they've had all kinds of support and they're at a seventh grade level. And you're supposed to be teaching them like this set of standards and trying to do activities with the whole class. And it's really frustrating. So what if you could, for 13 hours of instructional time, right? Like the same amount of time that you dedicate to like lining your kids up to go to lunch over the course of a year, right? Like you could put all of those kids at the same baseline so that you could have those discussions and do those group projects and not spend half of your time trying to backfill all of that missing prerequisite knowledge that would allow you to do that.
I hope we're contributing something here that years down the road is going to help these kids, and so that when they're in consumer math or pre-calculus or algebra 1 or geometry or anything, this fractions are a concept that's not scary. They understand them as numbers, and they're ready to take off into the content of algebra or whatever it may be. And the research does bear that out.
Teaching is a hard job, right? And we need to, like, anything that we put out in the universe, like EL needs to be the first people to say, like, teachers are heroes, and they're being asked to do things that, like, people can't, like, it's not possible to do what they're being asked to do. And we're not trying to replace anybody. Like, I would not work for an ed tech company that really thought that they could replace a teacher, because I'm a teacher at heart and I taught kids. I didn't teach math, I taught kids, right? And most teachers are out there to teach kids. And what we want to do is we want to come along beside them and say, you know, we understand the difficulty of this task that you are, like, this heroic task that you're trying to accomplish. And we can't do what you can do, but maybe we can make your life better here. And maybe we could help you do the things that you do best by doing the things that the computer does best, right? So everybody's doing what they do best instead of trying to do stuff that, like, is impossible. Let's stop trying and let's free up that time to do things that only teachers can do. Talk to the kid who hasn't had breakfast. Talk to the kid who just lost her grandmother. Help kids interact with each other. Kids from different backgrounds, help them work in collaborative groups, right? Help them have discussions about concepts that computers won't, and not even AI is going to be able to do that. Only a teacher can do that, right? And so we want to unlock a teacher's ability to do that with all of her students. That's what Frax is really about.
I would say that I think that it's a good bet. I think if you want your kids to learn fractions, I think we have a really good system of doing it. And we go through the process of, like, super simple, here's the concept, and we introduce the concepts really well in an engaging way that I think the kids will really respond to. And, you know, I think it's a great product, and I wish I had it when I was a kid.
I hope you'll give Frax a chance and see. I think it's cool, and it's unlike anything that I have seen before.